us welcome Dane Roberts. Dane Roberts is a practicing archaeologist who received his bachelor's in anthropology at Arizona State University. For the past 4 years, he has worked in cultural resource management archaeology and is now pursuing a master's in archaeology at Georgia Southern University with a focus on southeastern United States and Mongolian archaeology. And we definitely need to talk about how those two coincide and if that's two separate degrees or one degree together, because I imagine those are very, very different to learn about.
Funnily enough, actually not that different, especially when you look at sort of the transitional periods. For example, in Mongolia, the transition from the late Neolithic to the early Bronze Age, and from the late Archaic to the early Woodland,
Mm-hmm.
where you begin to see actual steep societal changes. Whereas in Mongolia, it's as we'll talk about in the presentation a little bit in more depth. You begin to see like animal domestication, including
Yeah.
that of the horse, and in the southeast, you begin to see the adoption of agriculture. So
Huh.
what I proposed, uh, my proposed thesis that isn't
Mm-hmm.
officially a thesis yet, but it's when I applied, they
Yeah.
required like an
Oh,
example
yeah.
of what
Yeah, yeah.
thesis you want to do, and I was like, well, I want to look at compare the lithic material, the stone tool material of these two
Oh.
time periods, and see how society adapted the stone tool material during these transitional periods. Is there any similarities? Did the you know like the adoption of agriculture and animal domestication force them to change it, or were they already changing it, or did it have no effect whatsoever, kind of thing, such as that. So
I did not think that. That is
yeah.
very interesting. That makes way more
Now, of
sense.
course,
Like,
yeah. Now, of course, there are some steep differences, but
yes, of course.
there's enough similarities. Yeah.
Well, when you think of the lithics, I didn't think of
Yeah.
that. Like that, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
well, yeah, everybody had
Yeah.
lithics at one point
Yeah.
in their history, so
Exactly.
I
Exactly. So,
that makes a lot more sense. I really
yep.
like that. All right, let me share with you. So I'm going to share it with share the screen with you, so you'll be able to see what slide we're on as well.
Okay.
Though this whole system is looking a little sketchy. What the heck? Hmm. All right, we're gonna have to do this. All right, can you see that?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, then we
Let's see.
leave it handed over to you, Dane.
Am I the one who's clicking that, or are you going to
I,
click
I
it
am gonna
next?
click it. So just tell me when to go next, if you don't mind
Okay,
that.
that works. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so welcome to my presentation on China and Mongolia, the Forgotten Cradles of Civilization, a look at the cultural legacies of East Asia. Go ahead and click the next slide.
All right.
So, whenever we hear Cradle of Civilization, because of how modern archaeological schools and documentaries and novels and movies like, say, The Mummy from the 1990s or anything
Sorry.
like that. What happened here? Yeah,
Sorry,
that's
I'm
all right.
your
It happens.
your camera froze on my screen, so I tried to refresh it, and that's what happened. But we're
Sorry.
good. We're good. We're
Yeah,
good.
but anyway, yeah, but anyways, because of all those types of media, we tend to think of the cradle of civilization as Mesopotamia. For one thing, that's not necessarily 100% true because there are actually multiple quote unquote craters of civilization. For example, the Indus civilization, or say in Peru with the Norte Chico civilization, the Maya, the Olmec, etc. And even then, that also doesn't take into account nomadic peoples um, who also arose and didn't necessarily have cities or agriculture, which is oftentimes what people, archaeologists back in the day when it was like
Yeah.
when we acted like Indiana Jones, because yes, Indiana Jones is very indicative of archaeologists from the 1910s to the 1940s ish.
Yeah.
Um, when we acted like that, the whole idea of civilization was big cities and agriculture, and
Mm-hmm.
but that's not that's very reductive way of
Yeah.
thinking about that. But even then, even when we take into account the other cradles of civilization, like the Indus Valley civilization or the Norte Chico civilization in South America or the Olmec, uh, China and Mongolia tend to be left sort of in the wings when they really shouldn't. And there's a lot of things that point to us needing to include them. Um, on top of the fact that we probably should do away with the whole idea of a cradle of civilization anyway, because how do you define civilization? But within the whole context of a quote unquote cradle civilization, we can argue for China and Mongolia being placed in there. Go to the next slide. And you can see that right here. There's a picture of China and Mongolia. Go ahead and next slide. So we're first going to take a look at why they should be considered this by looking at the development of microblade technology. Go ahead.
I love that.
Yeah. So microblade technology is exactly how it sounds. It's a tiny, not microscopic, but tiny, small pieces of chert or flint. It's the same thing. It's called different names depending on whether you're in Africa. Whether you're in America or in like Eurasia, but they're essentially the same thing. And they're tiny blades that are flaked off of small, tiny cores, and then placed into usually paddles made of bone or wood to make essentially composite weapons, like you see here on this picture. And I believe the next slide is another example of that. And actually, see this picture right here is a picture of one of the bone halves that they would insert those things in there.
Wow.
And there were a lot of reasons they did this, and we'll get into more detail with that in a second. But one of the basic reasons is it's just simply a resource saving tool. Because it's a lot easier to replace, say, a tiny blade within the haft rather than I broke my entire spear point and now I've got to make an entire new one. But go ahead and go to the next slide.
Point.
And here's another example, sort of what hafting those into the bone tools or wood tools would sort of look like. A good example of this would be like the sort of Aztec sword, with the obsidian. Essentially something along that line.
That's what Alex just said in the comments. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, and go on to the next slide. And so, as I said, there's a lot of reasons that this happened. One, resource saving. Two, organic material like wood and bone tended to be a lot more durable. Whereas stone points tend to be sharper. For example, it took more time to make to manufacture wood or bone implements than it took stone tools, but they would last longer, and then vice versa. And then what was reusable, the organic was reusable, whereas stone tools tend to be expendable. And we go to the next slide. And you can see that here in this sort of depiction here, where it's like organic, strong, stone, lethal, inset, strong, and lethal. And if we continue on, and microblade technology was relatively widespread. Really, actually, not even just in East Asia. You find it all the way in Neolithic England. But microblade technology was very much a technology that was endemic in Northeast Asia, as you can see here on this map, in in Mongolia and northern China, whereas non-microblade technology was indicative of more south of that area. And continue there. And here's another map just sort of showing the distribution of sites that microblades had been found. And you can see they're also in Japan.
Yeah.
All over the place. And if you continue.
And what time period is this, like, approximately?
From the Upper Paleolithic, roughly, 40,000 years ago, to the Neolithic around 4,000 years ago. It's a long time.
So I'm very bad with times and especially how times in other parts of the world relate to ancient Egypt. So sometimes I just need like the number to like, okay, 40,000 years ago, we're not talking ancient Egypt. We're not like, it's sometimes it's like, so this is really old technology. This is much older than I expected.
It is very, very old. And if you continue, and this is talked about in a variety of different academic papers, such as this one by Chao Zhao, Yao Ping Wong and John P. Walden. Now, I do want to put it aside. Now, Melissa doesn't need to hear this because she's already aware of this practice. Usually, if it's more than 3 authors on a paper, you use the phrase
Yes.
et al.
Et al.
But if you use 3, if there are 3 of them, you can say their whole names.
I love, yeah.
But there are some papers, and I'm not making this up. We'll actually talk about one in a minute later in this video that have like hundreds of authors.
I don't
like,
understand how that works. I really don't. And
it has a lot to do with things like looking at various different methods that are used. But anyway,
yeah.
But in this paper, they look at the regional variation in the shift towards microlithization in North China.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and go to the next slide. And you can see right here all of the sites that they are looking at in this paper. And if we continue. And here are some examples of the lithics that they found. And as you can see, they're again microblade technology, very small tools and things like that, with the blade production over there, and then they're reduced into the small pores and then inset.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, and there's some more examples there.
Gosh. This is just so like amazing to me because like obviously we have lithics in Egypt, but I am not that type of artifact person, and
no.
I was on a recent excavation for our kids camp, and one of the archaeologists thought that the kids are doing the excavating, and then there's like 2 or 3 archaeologists plus me and another one who mostly are working education, found something, and he was pretty confident that it was some sort of piece, and luckily the other girl who is mainly doing education, her background is in lithics of Native American and certain eras, so she pulled this thing out and she was just like, I don't think it is. And I'm just looking at it and I'm like, that looks like a rock, like it looks like a rock.
There are certain indicators that you can find.
It's it's very hard.
And so you can see in this graph that essentially microblade technology sort of arose first, as it was getting colder, and then began to spread further south as it got warmer into the other parts of China, and you continue going on. And this is the conclusions, which you can say, which briefly it says a comprehensive analysis of the early microblade remains reveals that North China was an important region that witnessed the origin and further development of microblade technology when it first emerged. I was wrong in the dates. Around 27 to 26,000 years before the present. And it often coexisted with other blade technology remains. People employed various techniques to produce microblades and cores. And it essentially became more elaborately made and regularized in form production around 26,000 years ago, and microblades can be identified further on. Early development trajectory of microblade technology in China resulted from combinations of cultural interactions as well as environmental changes and geographical conditions. So again, it arose as sort of a way to conserve resources and as essentially a reaction to the environment. And there's of course more that people can read here on this conclusion. This was very much an abridged version of their conclusion that I left some information out, but you get the general gist of the idea. So to continue, and then it's also talked again by Mingji Yi et al. Microblade technology and the rise of serial specialists in north central China. And you can go ahead and continue. And they looked at several different archaeological sites here in North China and Mongolia. Go ahead and continue. Looking at essentially age ranges from about of sites around 60,000 to 7,000 years, give or take. Finding microblades, frequency of distribution of lithics from the Four Springs, and finding a lot of microblade lithics and debitage, as you can see in that lower table there.
Wow. Yeah.
That's amazing. And here's just another example of sort of the various different microblades that they found. You can see all the microblade cores and the core flakes and things like that.
Oh, this is cool. Pestles and whetstones and
wow,
lots of other stuff.
and looking at them in their stratigraphic level, and as you can see,
Yeah.
way down at the bottom of the stratigraphic
Yeah,
level,
yeah, that's...
they get like 7,000 examples.
God,
So, and
that's
yeah, so
that's
yeah, and if
insane.
you,
I love that. Wow.
and so what they found in this paper is that as the weather began to get colder, microblade technology in a lot of ways was used as a way to uh, create sophisticated clothing to essentially make warmer clothing during the
Wow.
winter. And they even state that, yes, most certainly these were used as weapons and for butchering meat and things like that. They have found a lot of evidence that these were used to help essentially adapt for the cold weather and make winter clothing.
Wow.
So, you know,
That's amazing.
very, very ingenious way to come up with a way to solve things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh.
And now we come to the next one, the invention of the earliest pottery. Because pottery is oftentimes one of the things that people point to in the development of civilization. They point to, for example, Mesoamerica, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley. However, none of them have anything on China. And if we continue,
I always hated that because the excuse that I remember, and this is like, I'm talking elementary school, high school, that like the categories of a civilization, was that you made pottery because you were more stationary. I understand. You do need like a kiln or in some cases a very, very hot fire. So I understand that aspect, but I always was like, but like you can make little things you can make little ceramic things that not necessarily like pots. Like you can make other decorative things that I feel like you don't have to be stationary. If you're making like tiny little amulets out of ceramics and you use a really hot fire, like you don't need to be stationary for that. You just keep making a hot fire other places. And so I remember thinking that was one of the other ones I sort of understood and I got the gist of, but I was just like, why is it pottery? Like people can move around and make pottery. You make pottery for the time that you're sitting in the cold of one place, and then you get to take it everywhere you want for the rest of the time. It didn't make sense to me.
Well, funnily enough, you mentioned that. So actually, that's something we're going to address. So for one thing, this came out in, was it 2012? Yeah, I believe. Yeah, this came out in 2012. Geez, hard to believe that was that long ago. But in 2012, archaeologists found the earliest examples of pottery, 20,000, dating to 20,000 years ago, in Jianrendong cave in China. And you can go ahead and go to the next one. And this is a relatively,
amazing.
Yep.
Oh my God.
And there are other examples that can be found in the next paper that we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, they found quite a few pieces of pottery. And if you continue,
that's not just little. That is a pot. Like I feel like sometimes like you find evidence and it's like real small and you're just like, this is pot. Like that is a pot. That is enough pieces to fully diagnostic pieces and stuff. That's amazing.
Yep. And right here, Jianrendong Cave is, I believe,
right here.
Right here. Yep. And then continue. Did I include that? Yeah. So in this sense, the reason how they determine the state is they used a couple of things. One, they used some form of fluorescent dating. I forget exactly what kind, but it's a type of dating that you can sort of use to get older dates than carbon-14. But also they used carbon-14 dating, and with these dates they were able to roughly date these pieces of pottery to around 20,000 years ago, give or take. And if you continue. And then another example of this can be found in this paper by Shinya. I can't quite see his last name.
Shoda.
Shinya Shoda et al. Titled "Late Glacial Hunter-Gatherer Pottery in the Far Eastern, in the Russian Far East: Indications of Diversity in Origin and Use." And if you continue. And they looked at these various sites here, specifically the one up to the top, Ustinovka 3. And continue. And here are some examples of those pieces of pottery. As you can see, they look very similar to the ones found in Jianrendong Cave. Now, I should preface this: while this is "quote unquote" in Russia, this is what is still East Asia, and Russia
Yeah.
didn't conquer, and I mean literally conquer
Yeah.
East Asia until like the 1700s and 1800s. So it was like a relatively recent
Yeah.
newcomer to East Asia. And
Yeah.
also back then there would have been no Chinese or Mongolians or what have you. They wouldn't have even have a concept of that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
either way, in East Asia, they were developing this pottery like you can see here. If
And
you
it's
continue to the next
and
slide.
it's decorated. Like this
Yeah,
looks
it's
like
decorated.
this looks like
Yeah.
really, really early pre-dynastic pottery, and
Yeah.
to be honest, it also looks like most Egyptian pottery because their pottery is really boring. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows Melissa hates Egyptian pottery because Egyptian pottery, they go really cool in the pre-dynastic age and they just like completely slump down. It's all this plain stuff, like very little decoration. Then they do a little bump in the New Kingdom and then it's all boring.
So they did so they look pretty in the time of King Scorpion in armor. But,
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like the only ones that they even tried to do it, but it's so funny because it's just like you can just tell that they throughout the rest of ancient Egyptian history they were like, we're gonna put our effort to things that we think are more important. Like it was so
Yeah.
obvious the way that they do it that this is just pottery. They had nothing
Yeah,
like, and that's very funny to me because it's like they had so many other things that they were doing. They just didn't waste their time on making pottery
Yeah.
pretty. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
Oh,
here's
look at
just
the
another
decorations,
example.
yeah.
And there are some of the dates they got. And again, they're not quite as old as
Mhm.
the 20,000
Okay.
range, but you can see there's like a 17,000, 16,000
Mhm.
range. So they're most certainly approaching those dates. So right within that same time period.
Yeah.
And they found material in it like charcoal and food crusts and things like that, as you can see on that graph.
So cool.
And if you continue on,
Yeah, come on, go. Go. Okay, now it's good.
and so, and these are the methods they use, and again, it's a lot of the
Mhm.
same thing. Looking at enzymes and fluorescence and things like that. This is mainly, I little aside, I started including like, screenshots of these
Mhm.
academic papers in my things because primarily as a response to a lot of in the public, a lot of people like say Graham Fuckwit, who doesn't know what he's talking about, Hancock, and such misquoting academic papers, and so I started, providing these screenshots saying like, okay, here's what the academic papers actually say. You cannot say anything otherwise. Here it is. So again, this is mainly put in there so you can sort of read for
Wow.
yourself what they actually say and what the methods are. Because
Absolutely.
as Melissa will tell you, a lot of times the method sections of the academic papers are the most boring thing.
Oh my god, yeah. That's why I'm an art historian more than I am an archaeologist because
exactly,
even though I hate art historical theory and sometimes those are also extremely boring, I can take those a little bit easier sometimes than like the really deep science stuff of archaeology that I am much more a history and art person than the science portion for sure.
Exactly. So if we continue,
Alright.
okay, and so and I get this is more of the same jargon. Looking at lipids and things like that. Food proteins and such. So if we continue,
that's very cool.
And here's getting some more of the dates again, right in that 16,000 range. So right in the range of the earlier pottery. 20,000 years ago, give or take. Continue. I'm trying to get to the conclusion here. Here we go. So the conclusions is what they found is, is that this pottery was essentially used as a way for, like, for example, processing foods. Like they found a lot of fish remains and fish proteins. So, perhaps they were like emerged in relation to harvesting migratory fish. And also perhaps, traditions emerging if, depending on location, maybe like the brewed beer, all kinds of things, cooking, especially as a cooking innovation, because now you have a container that you can cook and or carry your food in and harvest fish. So, these were adaptive materials that were, technologies that were used depending on the environment you were in. Which I think far too often is something that is not mentioned in what makes a civilization. Which actually brings us to the next thing: earliest agriculture in Eurasia. So East Asia competes for a lot with South America for who developed agriculture first. I think currently the earliest date for agriculture in the world is in South America with the domestication of squash. But East Asia is like they're like neck and neck kind of thing.
Really?
So, yeah, so if you could go ahead and do next.
Ah.
And these specifically pertain to the domestication of millet, which is the thing, the plant on the left, and rice.
Yeah.
Millet and rice. So the earliest domestication of the common millet is described by Huyan Liu et al. In the paper simply titled "Earliest Domestication of Common Millet in East Asia Extended to 10,000 Years Ago." And if you continue on, they look at specifically archaeological sites near the Yellow River, were digging down in the archaeological site. As you can see in the pictures to the right, they found grain crop remains.
Wow.
Continue on.
Oh my gosh, that's a cliff. Sorry, I'm noticing this picture. Yeah, this is like, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a dig site. I've dug pretty deep in certain places, but that's a dig site. Dang.
Oh yeah. And so what they did is they, of course, used carbon-14 dating to determine how old these remains were, and they got a date right around the 10,000 year mark, making it, if not the oldest evidence of agriculture, because again, South America is right now currently the oldest, but close enough.
Getting close. Yeah.
It's among the oldest, which you can see that here in the whole 10,400, 9,000 year, 2,493 year range to 10,295 range. So, right somewhere in the 10,000 range, approaching 11,000 years. If you continue on, and they just simply talk about this and this, that they have determined that it's just, millet was domesticated 10,000 years before present.
Yeah, foxtail millet.
Yep. So, and then if you continue on, and then they also looked at rice, which has been looked at by archaeologists such as Jijin Zhou et al. In their paper dating rice remains through phytolith carbon-14 study reveals domestication at the beginning of the Holocene. And we continue on.
God, there's so little about China. It's like okay, it's just such a big country.
It is, and they look at these sites here in the central Chinese coast, central Chinese east coast, because of course China has the south coast, South China Sea.
South coast, yes.
Yep. And continue on, and they again, like the millet, they looked at the phytoliths of rice grains found in archaeological sites. Like you can see the up close pictures of them here.
Yeah. Wild.
Yep. And it's continuing on. And again, they found a date that dated it to right around 8,000 ish years ago, give or take. Because again, carbon-14 dating gives you a nice range of sort of dates. And again, this conclusion just tells you, like, oh, we found it, and it's this old, kind of
and
thing.
You need this many paragraphs to explain that. Of course.
Exactly. Yeah, of course. But yeah, so as you can see, the thing that the overriding thing that people oftentimes use is the origin of civilization. Agriculture. Well, in China has that beat. China has it earlier than Mesopotamia. It has it earlier than the Indus Valley. It has it earlier than Egypt. The only one it doesn't have it earlier than is South America, and that's only by a couple hundred years, give or take.
But you're also right that South America is also not tended to be considered as like a cradle of civilization,
and which is an absolute disservice to it. So. Yeah.
Wow.
And so we continue on, and then we look at the spread of horse domestication and horse cultures into East Asia. And into East Asia is very important, and that's because horses were first domesticated by the Indo-European peoples, as you can see on this map, specifically the Nile culture, around 5,000 years ago in what is the Pontic-Caspian steppe, which is most certainly part of Central Asia. I have had people try to say, it's part of Europe. It's like, no, it is part of Central Asia. It's called Europe now because Russia, again, when it was expanding as a colonial power, took over Central Asia. but it's Central Asia,
No,
Middle West,
no, I would say that's
and
Asia. Yeah.
but it's also on the western end and not in East Asia.
Yes.
But once the domestication happened, it began to spread out. And if you continue on, and we know this because of papers like this one, which is this is one I forget how many they have in it. I think they had almost
so
100
many
or
already.
over 100. Yeah, but it's the origins and spread of domestic horses from the Western Eurasian steppes. By Pablo, if you'll go back.
Oh yeah, Pablo.
Pablo Labrado et al. And if you continue on, and again they looked at over see here 273 ancient horse genomes.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. And if you continue on,
I'm assuming that's from like ancient horse DNA.
Yeah. Ancient horse remains.
Gotcha.
Horse remains. And so what they found is horses were domesticated really twice. One by the Batai culture in what's now Kazakhstan, but also in the Pontic Caspian steppe. And whether that was independently or there was some influence is hard to determine. But they both happened there. But the modern horses that spread throughout Eurasia come from the Pontic Caspian steppe. With the earliest being and we'll talk about these in a second, but the Afanasyevo culture that went to Mongolia, and then the groups who went into Europe that eventually descended into the Germanic peoples and Celtic peoples and things like that. And then there was a second migration from the Indo-European homeland of the Santashta culture that brought with them chariots. Yes. They were the ones who invented chariots. So,
yes. I do know a little bit about this only because people think that Egyptians had horses the entire time, and I'm like, nope, New Kingdom, got them from the Near East, and chariots pretty much came along with them. They kind of, hand in hand, came to Egypt.
With the Hyksos, I believe.
Yeah, Hyksos are the main theory, the Canaanite group that is sort of identified as the Hyksos, but around that time, they're definitely, they don't really... You don't really see them pop up in the actual like art until getting closer into the actual New Kingdom, because Hyksos are technically Second Intermediate period, but they definitely we know they came from the Near East. The Hyksos were a group that had settled in Egypt, so they are the likeliest candidate to have brought them over. Yeah, for sure. Exactly.
So if you continue on, and so, as I said, the Afanasyevo is, as you can see in this graph, is one of the earliest groups. They moved into Western Mongolia around 3500 BCE, so around 5,500 years ago. Between that and 2500 BCE, or around 4,500 years ago. Again, it's hard to determine exactly when that happened, but sometime between then. Continue on. And we can see this in archaeological evidence. It's discussed by William. This is a funny last name to me. Honeychurch. It's all the earliest herders of East Asia examining Afanasyevo entering the central Mongolia. Continue on. And they look at various archaeological sites within Mongolia, as you can see here on this map, as well as within northern China and Russia. Continue on. Specifically looking at Afanasyevo burials, like you see here, because they had elaborate mound burials. Sometimes they're called Kyrgyzstan and things like that, but elaborate mound burials. And they, of course, looked at the genome as we continue on. And there are some more of the burials that they looked at. Colored in red Afanasyevo burial, and that as well here.
And these these are human burials that also included horses?
Yes, and we'll get to that in a second.
I'm getting ahead of myself. Yes. Oh, there we go.
And so of course they looked at the individuals buried in these graves, and of course they had various grave goods, knives, pottery, etc. And continue on. And they looked at their genome, and what they found is that the Afanasyevo moved into this region relatively quickly, with only with the Afanasyevo burials and the non-quote-unquote Afanasyevo burials only being comparatively like a couple hundred years, 126 years apart. So it shows that they moved, the Afanasyevo people moved into this area relatively quickly, comparatively. So, and again, you can see that here, and with them they brought with them agropastoralism and horse domestication. So.
Sorry, the thing that popped up is the appearance of lactose-reducing dairy technologies to make yogurts, cheeses, curds, and milk-based alcohol was fundamental.
Yep, they brought that with them too, because most humans were and still are lactose intolerant.
Yep.
Only people in various parts of Africa, Europe, and East Asia, Central Asia and Northern Central Asia, like Mongolia, developed lactose tolerance. Some people in like China, Egypt, various other parts of Africa, and the Americas did not develop, and of course, like Australians, did not develop lactose tolerance.
I just saw cheeses and I was like, cheeses? What's this have to do with it? I had to see.
Yeah. And then you can see here on this graph that between 3000 and 1500 BC, chariot riding was introduced, and then after that, 1200 BCE is when you begin to actually see actual horse riding. So, which and chariots being talked about in this paper here by Yuri Essen et al., titled "Chariots of Bronze Age Central Mongolia," based on materials from the Khoid-Tamir River Valley. And most of those papers, and actually not what I want to address. I want to address the pictures I included into it, because the pictures say everything that needs to be said. We can tell that they had chariots based off of the rock art. You can see that very clearly in these rock arts. These are very much chariots.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh my god, that's insane.
And this is a technology that they had long before, as you already confirmed, long before Egypt and other parts of the world.
Because man, like this is probably around the same time that you see rock art in Egypt, but you don't see chariots there. You just see hunters just running around. Huh? That's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh my god, there's more.
And
wow.
Yep, there's more. And again, this is what I mean. This is why, I didn't include any of the methodology or anything. It's like, because the rock art says all that needs to be said. It's like, this shows the chariots being present in this region during this period of time.
That's amazing.
Yeah. That I may have accidentally included that.
Slide there we go.
Oh wait, no, there we go.
Okay.
And so this is again showing the distribution of horses as well as chariots on the steppe. And you can see, I believe in that picture, some pieces of chariots in the bottom corner.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So
that's really cool.
Yep. So if we can do, and then where we begin to see, especially at horse cultures, is connected to objects known as deer stones, which, shocker, based off of the picture, they get their names based off of the depictions of deer on them. Now, not all of them have depictions of deer, and I've actually seen this for myself. There's at least a couple that have like a human face and like weapons on them and things like that. But like you see in the left corner right there, the bow and arrow and the knives and such. But most of them have the deer or horses on them. So, continue.
Oh, there's a face.
And there's the face, yeah. And I actually have seen that particular one right there, and it was, it's tall. They're cool. Yeah. They're awesome. Yeah. Awesome. But these are megalithic structures, and again, Egypt is known for what megalithic structures? The pyramids. Well, Mongolia has their own megalithic structures, and these are the deer stones. And if we continue on,
go. Hey, mouse. Okay.
And you can see these deer stones being connected to the use of the horse in Bronze Age Mongolia, as seen in this paper by William Taylor, Horse Tomography and Use in Bronze Age Mongolia, which continue. Specifically connected to deer stones. And you can see the deer stones here, and as you see around it, there are horse head burial mounds. And so what does that mean? And if you just go to the next slide, so they would bury around these deer stones the skull of a horse and its hooves.
Ah.
And this, of course, had some particular ritual significance. It actually, I have, because I actually got to speak to one of the specialists on deer stones a few years back.
Oh, cool.
Byron, yeah, uh, on the deer stones, and so they're very much a very well studied thing.
Huh.
And again, horses are one of the most sacred animals in Central Asia, and so of course it's no surprise that deer stones are connected to horse sacrifice.
I learn new things every day because dang, do
Yeah,
you think I know a lot about megalithic structures in like
yeah,
Stonehenge and all of those things, and have never heard or seen a deer
yep,
stone. This is
yep.
wild.
Oh yeah. And if you
Huh.
continue on, and here's some more
Okay.
examples. And again, you see in that picture, there's the horse, and right beside it is its hooves.
Its hooves. Huh.
Yep,
So
yep,
interesting.
yep. And continue on, and there's, I believe that's William Taylor holding one of those horse skulls coming from a deer stone.
Wow. Also,
So
just like this is so beautiful. God,
it,
Mongolia.
having been there, it is beautiful. But honestly, it also, there was a couple of other Americans with me, and we were all like, if we didn't know we were here in Mongolia, we would think
Oh, I already know what you're gonna say.
that we were in Montana or Wyoming or Colorado or something.
It
That's
does.
essentially, yeah.
As soon as I could see it. I have not been to any of those states, but I under like that.
Oh, I've been there. They're
That
beautiful states,
they're
but
beautiful.
they definitely have a specific geography that you can
Yeah,
recognize.
that is
So,
yeah. I can understand that. Huh.
yeah. And then this is connected to horse sacrifice and butchery in Mongolia. And again, this is by William Taylor et al. And you'll notice one of the authors is that specialist who wrote this book right here.
Oh yeah. How
Yep.
do you have any idea how to pronounce that name? Because I'm
Barashkan, Barashkan,
It's a long name.
John Rashford. Yeah, he told me and the other archaeologists just to call him Byra. So I know him by
Okay.
Byra.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So
a long name.
yeah, it is. But if you continue on, and you can see evidence of this horse butchery again, and this is an example of sort of what is found within the horse burials. The skull and sometimes the vertebrae, but especially the skull and the hooves. And you can tell that these horses were sacrificed by these blunt force trauma wounds that you can see directly on the skull
Wow.
cavity right here, as you see in these pictures. So they were very clearly, specifically butchered for these reasons. And I believe the next picture is just an up closer, an up close look. And you can see right there on the left, there's that some sort of blade instrument, and the other one is some sort of blunt force instrument, puncturing instrument. But they were definitely sacrificed. All right, now this brings us to the next section: the rise of city-states in China, because especially when you think of, like, say, Uruk or, say, Abydos or what have you, city-states are very much associated with the earliest forms of civilization. So if you continue on. So the earliest, distinct, recognizably distinct cultures in China are these that you see here on this map. With the earliest being the Hongsheng culture. Go to the next one. That has a period where it's recognized as a distinct cultural group between 4,500 and 1800 BCE. Now you'll note 4,500. That's right around the rise of Uruk. Around 6,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you'll go to the next page. They, for one thing, they're very well known for their working of jade artifacts, which, if you go to the next page, we begin to actually see the earliest developments of recognizable Chinese culture. Specifically, the ones that are C and D which are dragon figures.
Shapes.
So dragons being one of the most endemic figures in Chinese culture, and as you can see, they were already 6,000 years ago at least important enough to carve multiple jade figures of them.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
they're called
beautiful.
pig dragons and things like that.
Yeah.
And this is a trend that will continue throughout, that we'll talk about a couple of times actually.
Yeah.
And then if we continue on,
I do have to point out the cicada, which is a crazy.
Well, that's because in a lot of, like, for example, in the Han Dynasty of China, which is roughly contemporary with the Roman Empire, emperors especially, would be buried with a jade cicada in their mouth, and it's because it was viewed as a symbol of rebirth. So think about it,
the scarab. Yeah, I got it in it's that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So very similar concepts,
Yeah,
So-
the scarab was coming out of a dung ball, but I guess the cicadas were just coming out of the ground. Huh.
Yeah.
I hate cicadas a lot, but now I think I have to have a little bit more respect for them now. We're going through a session right now over here on the East Coast, and, like, granted, it's not nearly as bad as I remember in childhood, but I have finally seen one in person, and I was like, dang, that thing is way bigger than I remembered it was.
Yeah, Ooh. Exactly. And there's close examples of that, and you can see that's a fairly large jade dragon. Yeah. And then to the right is the pig dragon.
The pig one. I thought that was going to be like a bracelet. Like, I thought it was going to fit like onto somebody's wrist. That thing is huge.
Yeah, they're big. Yeah.
Would that be used for? Is that a necklace or?
I'm not. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look at it. But
I was going to say
it's a jade artifact. It could. Yeah, it has a hole.
It has a hole.
It could be on a staff. It could be decorative. It could be worn on a piece of clothing. Wow. You know.
God.
So yeah. And
very interesting.
Continue on. Yeah.
Go. My mouse is not being nice to me today.
And of course, they're also known for their pottery, which you can see on the left there, and also their clay figures with the person making the ooh face. Like, ooh, this is yeah.
Oh my gosh. I've never seen that before.
And then this is also talked about by David G. Cohen and Robert B. Murochik. In the the Cambridge World Prehistory book, Volume 1, Chapter 2.7, where they actually talk about the rise of the urban centers, urban settlements in this period. And if you click to the next couple of slides, starting with, for example, the central Hainan area of the Longshan culture, which is sort of the later iteration of the Hongshan culture, right around 5,000-ish to 7,000-ish years ago. Continue on, and this is where you begin to see all the major centers and major, like, walled villages in city-states and things like that, and you can see they're all over the place.
Yeah. Wow.
With one of the most famous. Click next, I believe it's the next one. Oh no, sorry. And then there's more distribution, and as you can see, there were already forming.
Oh, I see. This is the yellow
cluster. Yeah, this is the
the yellow river was up here at the top on this image, and now it's at the bottom. And so
they're all over the place.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the most well known of these being the city that has been given the designation of Shamao, which had its apex as a cultural center from around 2300 to 1800 BCE. And it's a massive pyramid.
It is. Holy crap.
Yes. 4,300 years ago. Now, Melissa, what was also built around that time? Pyramids.
The pyramids, yeah. Independent invention, people. It's not aliens. Independent invention versus diffusionism. Independent invention.
Yep.
I'm gonna smack everybody who says it otherwise. Yeah.
But it was a massive Longshan culture city-state. And if you go to the next, located toward the north of China and South Mongolia, as you can see in that circle there. And at the site, you find, for one thing, you see on this picture, you find carvings of dragons, or at least what looked like dragons.
Yeah, yeah.
Some archaeologists have said, oh yeah, they look like dragons, and they made a connection to something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. And I tend to agree with them, and most tend to agree that this seems to be an earlier iteration of a later depiction of dragons at a later site. But they've also argued, oh, okay, it could be fish, but most think it's like, well, it doesn't exactly look like fish. It looks more like a dragon.
Yeah, it
so
looks like yeah.
It's again, you see this continuation of dragons being culturally significant figures within early Chinese society. Continuing on, and of course, you get weird mythological, figures carved into stone, as you can see here.
Well, these are very, very South and Central American-esque. That's
yes.
Independent invention, but they are
probably gonna ask us for Gum Gum at some point.
Yeah, no, very much looks like Easter Island heads, and
exactly,
very interesting. It's just showing you how everyone's just like us. We're all the same in a little bit of ways. That's very interesting.
Yep,
Beautiful.
And also they found jade and bronze, what are known as dagger axes. They're essentially like dagger knives that are hafted to a long shaft, sort of like a pike or a pole axe, type of thing. And then, of course, they also found jade decorations like that face right there.
So cool.
And they also found evidence of craft specialization, as discussed by Hua Huang et al. And this is something that I actually found only last week.
Oh, so there we go.
So I added this in because this was a new thing that I thought definitely needed to be in this. But they found evidence of craft specialization in the Central Shamao site in Shaanxi, China, with a paper titled Craft Specialization in Highland Longshan Society Perspectives from a Bone Needle Workshop in the Central Mound of the Shamao site. So if we continue going on. And so what they did is they found over 16,000 bone needles within the Central Mound, with the second most common artifacts being found in the area being arrowheads and owls, and they don't even touch the amount of needles. The arrowheads, they only found 1,200 arrowheads and are a little over 1,000 owls, and then the rest is just not even touching it. And you can see the bone examples of those bone needles in this picture here. So very clearly they were producing these bone needles in high amounts, at high frequencies. But if you continue on.
That's amazing.
And so what they discovered is that, for one thing, these were on the towards the top of the Central Mound. And so what they discovered was, this is evidence for really early serial specialization. Of course, we've already talked about serial specialization with the microblades, but this is other serial specialization involving bone needles. Two, being that it was found towards the top and where of the mound, where of the city site where the elite individuals would have lived, this may have been a specialization of the elite of the area rather than specialization of, say, the common worker. So it may have been some degree of prestige. And they also found that the bones that the needles were most made out of were goat and and sheep, and then pig shortly after that. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting.
And then you have the Ping Liang Tai site, which its period of cultural height was between 2200 and 1900 BCE. Continue on, and there they find the earliest ceramic drainage system in monsoonal East Asia. And if you can go just to the next page, and I believe you will see those examples of those. Yeah. So for one thing, there's the drainage system there. You can see that in that center picture. Yeah.
Wow. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's so
and
cool.
then if you continue on to the next one, those are the ceramic pipes that they would use. So they actually had plumbing to help, take care of this.
Oh, these are pipes. Did they insert inside of each other, sort of?
Yeah, they because if you look at the one in the top right corner, you can sort of see the little bottom lip that's there. So inserting in each other.
So cool.
Yeah. Uh, and this is something that you would see like in, Mohenjo-daro or Rome,
Yeah.
but this is like before or right around the same time as
Yeah.
Mohenjo-daro, definitely before Rome. And if you continue on to the next slide, I believe. Oh, so nope. Go back.
Yeah, there we go.
Go back to the abstract actually.
This one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I didn't include the conclusion. So they stated what they thought. They stated what they thought in the abstract. So what they found is they think that rather than this being these ceramic drainage systems being like made through, say, an elite individual or elite individuals exerting influence on people to build this, that these may have been constructed by communal groups and societies as sort of group efforts to deal with environmental changes and floods and monsoons, showing that the development of complex infrastructure is by no means tied to the rise of elites and authority figures, like you would assume, like a lot of the old classicists would, place on, say, Uruk or ancient Egypt.
Huh.
So, yeah.
That's very interesting. It's very interesting because, without revealing where I work, my work, even though it is much, much more modern than all of this, has a very similar system where sort of the community, like the city itself, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, didn't sponsor a sort of kind of communal, like, especially surprisingly including drainage and such, but they kind of invited the community to do it, and that's like why our city looks like our city today, and why we also have so many flooding problems, because they didn't do it well. But I think that's very funny that, like, the elites don't really do it, they kind of just leave it up to everyone to kind of make it up.
Very exactly. Yeah. Okay, and then we have going again back a little bit further in time to the, and this is in South China, to the Kujialing culture, which existed as a distinct cultural group, had a cultural height between 3500 and 2500 BCE. So again, right around the time of ancient Egypt, and you can see right there, right in the center. Okay. So it's like South Central China. And you go over here next, and this is where you begin to see the emergence of walled towns in the middle Yangtze River Valley area, as discussed in this paper by Siwei Shan et al. The emergence of walled towns in the prehistoric middle Yangtze River Valley, excavations at the Zhou Maling site. If you go over here, and as you can see right here on this graph, they're very much are outlines of sort of a walled city area within this region. If you continue on, and then you have right around the same time as this, you have the Liangzhu culture, which was roughly contemporary, 3300 to 2300 BCE at its cultural height, and it was located on the central east coast of China, as you can see here in this picture. And it too was a walled city. You can see right there in that outline, it had a walled city around the river and things like that. There are a couple more pictures. That's another one. Now it's a little bit grainy. I tried to find a better, a clearer picture version of this picture. I could not for the life of me find it. But whatever, you can still get the idea.
I can get it.
Very much was. Yeah, it's a walled city, and again, this is right around the same time as cities in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Yet again, it's not hardly ever mentioned. No. And if you continue on, I think there might be one more picture of it. Yeah, and there's another sort of up close picture of it right beside the river. Getting very much a walled city. And continue on. And and it had evidence of. Yep.
I've seen this picture before.
Yep, and it had very much evidence of like social stratification. There was very much an elite area, and as you can see within the wall, within that little tiny square that's colored in by the red dots, that's probably where the elites lived. And if you continue on, and at this they found beautifully carved jade objects like this piece right here that was probably a headdress piece, and then of course faces, like mask pieces, like over there, and jade discs and rings. So they very much were skilled craftsmen. And then we finally come to the Erlitou culture in the Jia dynasty, which had its cultural height between 2070 to 1520 BCE. And if you go to the next slide, so the Jia dynasty had, for the longest time, it was mentioned in early Chinese texts, but it was sort of like the quote unquote mythical, like first dynasty, sort of like
King Arthur.
You know, well,
Like,
and also
yeah,
I was gonna pull from your, your Egyptology,
Yes.
Like sort of like the Scorpion King before multiple King Scorpions were discovered.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Like that.
Narmer, which we now know
Narmer,
probably wasn't named, or not Narmer. I'm thinking of God. There's a different name for him. Menes. That's it. Yeah, Menes.
Yeah.
Like the mythical king Menes, and then we're like, no, his name is probably Narmer. Yeah.
And it was probably like he changed his royal name or something like that.
Oh yeah, probably. We're never gonna get that much information.
I've also heard he may or may not be related to the second King Scorpion. I don't know.
Oh no, I believe me, it will be. We need a time traveler to be able to answer those questions when it comes to
those questions.
There is so. I mean, this is very much in general of all archaeology. There are so many of those like minute little details that we won't know unless there is like textual evidence at that point, and it's just like you can't just assume anything at that point.
Exactly. But anyways, as we continue, so the early the Jia dynasty for the longest time was thought to be mythical. The archaeologists generally had an idea of where it was, like the time period it was supposed to be, roughly 2000 BC-ish, but there had never been like strong archaeological evidence to back that up until they found the finding of this city-state known as that they called Erlitou, as you can see here, located along the Yellow River. And they found bronze hoards, bronze foundries, bone workshops, etc., pottery workshops. Continue.
Big cemetery.
They found the earliest possible pieces of Chinese writing at the Erlitou site, as you can see here. Doesn't look exactly like modern Chinese script, but it's the start.
I was gonna say though, these look exactly like the earliest evidence of Egyptian writing, which are I'm not even joking you.
I know, yeah.
The tags, the ivory tags that are found, which have just one glyph on it, like these look exactly like it. That's
that I believe were found in King Scorpion's grave or something
in a lot of the early pre-dynastic graves, these have been found, and they've been identified as like tags that would have labeled usually like offerings from other estates to give to the king, and so it's literally like they look exactly like little tiny pieces with just one glyph on it that looks like a bird, and you're like, okay, and you're like, it's a bird, but it means something.
And that's probably what this would have been used for. Or you can, or maybe not necessarily probably, but you can. It's not a huge leap to assume it had a similar use.
That's so interesting.
And then, of course, he found bronze pitchers and jade embossed shields.
It's a shield? Oh my god, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, I believe that's a shield. And then if you go to the next one, and they've also found a jade dragon. Now, what's interesting is this was thought to be originally the earliest depiction of a dragon in Chinese archaeology. However, the reason that the Shimao site became like so fascinating is like they're like, holy shit, like these little dragon figures look very similar, our carvings on the wall look very similar to this. And then of course you have the Hongshan and the Longshan jade dragons that were carved as well. So in a lot of ways, this is the Erlitou site was sort of the culmination of the earlier Chinese city-states. And if you continue on, to the next slide. And also at the archaeological site at early 2, they found bronze arrowheads. They found more examples of the dagger axes, bronze pots, etc. So again, as I said, this is early 2 was essentially sort of the combination and synthesis of all the other earlier things that began to be produced by the Hongshan and the other like low central south central Chinese city states. In a lot of ways, this was sort of like, oh, those were city states. Now this is like approaching a kingdom of some sort.
Yeah.
So, and then if you go next, and then of course after that came the first, like, the first empire in a way, or the first major kingdom, and that would be the Shang dynasty. And this is the most well known and the most studied of the early Chinese dynasties, which is why and it's not even necessarily considered like the earliest Chinese civilization now, because again, early 2, but it is sort of like it was the successor group to the early 2 Xia dynasty culture. So with all of that, that is why, if we are going to use this concept of a cradle civilization, China and Mongolia definitely need to be in there, and need to, if not necessarily be the oldest, they need to be among the oldest. And I don't care about who's the oldest. I think that's a reductive argument, that serves no one. And it's just like, and also it ignores other things like nomadic cultures or things like that. So. All right, and that's essentially the end of this presentation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All right, we're flipping back over. All right, cool.
And I do want to say, sorry, Melissa, and before we get into that, I do want to say, obviously, now I'm going to graduate school now, so I'm not an expert in this stuff. That is why I provided my sources, but I have done a lot of research on this, so I can at least talk about it in this sense. Please check out the sources, and I actually have an earlier version of this on my YouTube channel that has all the sources in alphabetical order. So,
absolutely. So let's go through the questions that we have. We did get some that were already answered like throughout it, so I'm gonna skip the early ones. Friend at Arms mentioned that, like, quote unquote bipolar blades were mentioned. Is that a specific stoneworking technique, or is that a shape that certain stone tools have?
I think it may be like a biface. So what we call, like, for example, and again, I'm not, I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to look in the academic papers, but I believe bipolar is probably the same as biface. So a biface is a like projectile point or a blade that has, like, it looks like this. It's symmetrical. A uniface is like you've got this like circular round edge and then a flat area. So maybe something along those lines. Again, feel free to look in the sources and correct me on that, because I don't know right off the top of my head.
I think it was like something that was listed on one of the pages. I'm scrolling back into the presentation, seeing if I can find where that was. But the next question actually is for me, but Dr. Hubbs, you're gonna have to define that word. It said, didn't the Egyptians have onagers before horses? And I don't know what that is. So
onagers, and they're I believe like a donkey, like sort of.
Yes, they did. Yes, that is true. The Egyptians did have like donkeys and that as well, but I see. Asian wild asses. They did have donkeys or onagers. I've never heard that term before, so I'm learning new things every day. They did have donkeys. I'm trying to think. I'm like trying to, again, like, I'm not as good with dates, so I'm trying to think if I've seen them in like Old Kingdom depictions or mainly New Kingdom, but I feel like I have seen them in like some older ones as well. But honestly, haven't seen one of them of anybody riding it. It's mostly, I'm gonna do some Googling, but I'm pretty sure I've seen some of them in Old Kingdom, in some Old Kingdom stuff. But mainly they are very much more of an oxen group. They are mainly going to be the ones that are pulling around the plow and stuff like that, and potentially carts, I haven't seen very many depictions of like carts and stuff, but they did have like wheels and stuff, so like potentially they were driving things around in carts and stuff, and they obviously had to have some sort of wheel system to like roll ships past the cataracts and stuff like that. So they had some stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
And I know Alex answered your question. The Hyksos people are not the Sea Peoples. Those are two different intermediate periods. And I hate answering questions about Sea Peoples because I know nothing. Because
I would,
so
I would
confusing.
recommend like read Eric Klein's books on the subject, because he seems to be one of the experts on that area. So,
absolutely, yeah. It's a time period that it's like I know the Egypt side of it. I don't know the other group side of it.
Yeah.
And such. And then the last question we had, which I think seemingly it answered, but I think I'll still read the question because it's a pretty good one.
Okay.
Friend at Arms said, so the baby's first Chinese history narrative is that agriculture spread out from the Yellow River and the Yangtze. Was the Yangtze less influential than popularly thought, or was it just not the specific focus? You obviously showed later Yangtze cultures, but is there some difference between the cultures that like grew up around each of those rivers? Because I know they're semi-close, but not really close in certain areas.
I mean, there are, like, for example, North China is a lot more arid and mountainous, and like where the Yangtze River is more south, and that's where it's more tropical and subtropical, and a lot more riverine. And other than that, there's not really that much difference, because as we saw, as I point out in presentation, in North and South China, city-states arose roughly around the same time. They were roughly contemporaneous with each other. And even agriculture was roughly contemporaneous. I mean, millet sure was 10,000 years ago, but rice wasn't that far off. It was only 2,000 years later. So it wasn't like... and that's just the earliest that they found. So you wouldn't be surprising if later on they found earlier examples. So there's really not that much of a difference. It's just, again, north is a lot more... arid and mountainous, and closer to what is known as the Eurasian steppe, which is essentially, it's not quite the same, but it's roughly equivalent to, say, the Great Plains of North America in a lot of ways. And so, of course, that's why horses and horse domestication and animal domestication was a lot more easily disseminated into the region than in a swampy, riverine region.
Yeah. So, that was all of our questions that we had. Anyone, please continue to ask questions and such. One of my questions that I thought, honestly, so obviously I'm just going to assume that we are around the same age and both from America, and so it's frequently in third grade in most American states' curriculums, kids are learning about ancient cultures. And when I grew up, and I'm assuming probably when you grew up as well, you probably learned about the main ones of Egypt, Greece, and Rome.
Essentially, yeah.
Nowadays, at least in my state, we have more, and a lot of them are now learning about Egypt, Greece, Rome, China, and I believe some other groups are also... I'm blanking on which African group, but I believe they're also learning about one of the ones in more sub-Saharan Africa. Why do you think that is like a good step forward, and that is kind of putting China up on the scale of like quote unquote civilizations? And I know the thought that we don't necessarily need to talk about the definition of civilizations, but do you see that as like kind of a step forward to this?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, there's a lot of more could definitely be done.
Yes.
But yes, I agree. And because like again, even like in America, a lot of times, people hear about the Maya and the Aztec, but then everything else is left to the wayside. The Mississippian cultures, which had cities that rivaled medieval European cities. Cahokia is the most famous with 50,000. But even like near where I live, here in Georgia, the Etowah Mounds and Ocmulgee Mounds had population estimates, and these are rough estimates, but these are estimates based off of the amount of people that can live in villages. Had populations between 16 to 20,000 people. And that was like roughly equivalent to like medieval York, England. Things like that. Yet you don't hear about them often.
Yeah.
I think it's a good step forward, but a lot could definitely do more. And I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of it's going to have to be, um, uh, archaeologists and historians doing public outreach. Like I have 3 kids, and my eldest, I've gone to his school multiple times
Mm-hmm.
and talked about archaeology and done presentations on archaeology. And also my younger brother, who is 18 years apart from me. Long
Mm-hmm.
story. Uh, um, Love him to death, but
Yeah.
Anyways, he was in Boy Scouts a couple years back, and he
Ah.
still is. But
Mm-hmm.
went to one of the summer camps, and I taught the archaeology merit
Archaeology badge. Yeah.
and and so public outreach, I think, is going to have to be the best
Mm-hmm.
way. Doing what you and I are doing. Like I have TikTok and I have YouTube, and I talk about archaeology and history subjects, and I tend to do it in a lecture
Mm-hmm.
way, and that way it's accessible. Um, to people.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
you do TikToks and things like that. So yeah, sure. That was a long roundabout answer, but short
No.
answer is like yes, it's good, but more could be done, and I think
Yeah.
that's going to be going to have to be on us as the archaeologists.
Yeah. It's something that I was very surprised to kind of hear that people were learning because, and honestly jealous because,
Yeah,
again, like I didn't learn really anything about most parts of Asia in elementary school. And I
yeah,
remember in high school, you start with Western Civ as like the first main history course that you take. And I remember that I had heard that my school offered Eastern Civ. And like also
yeah.
very clearly, I went to Catholic school. I do not think that I got the best education that I possibly could have gotten. Just putting that out there in the world, and it is lucky that I'm here standing
How
in
how
all
ma-
this stuff.
how do you still have knuckles?
Yeah, exactly. Like I definitely like there are a lot of gaps, I'll say, probably in my knowledge about a
Yeah,
lot of things because they were filled with religion classes that were
yeah,
not
yeah,
necessary to my upbringing and such. But I
yeah.
remember hearing that there was an Eastern Civ class, and I was like, I want to take that because I felt like that I did not know anything about Eastern civilizations. And I think by the time I wanted to take it, or I asked somebody if I could take it, they were not offering it anymore, and I was really sad
That
because
sucks. Yeah,
I felt like that tug that I'm like I really want to learn about this stuff, and so and even when I got into college, I was an anthropology major with an archaeology minor or concentration and had an art history minor. And I essentially, to get around that, I was having very, longest story short, didn't really go to school to do archaeology and kind of stumbled into it, so I didn't really pick a great school in archaeology.
yeah,
And to fill essentially all of my gaps were the art history courses. And I pretty much only picked art history courses that were based on a time period that technically all of the art is pretty much archaeology. So again,
yeah.
I was telling Dane before we started that like I took a lot of classes essentially under he's my Russian professor. He was from like the USSR. He was an archaeologist when he was 19 in Afghanistan. He ran his own dig before then Russia came in and invaded. It's like this absolutely crazy batshit story, but he is a big
Yeah.
mentor of mine, and he taught us like we had Near Eastern archaeology with him. I had South Asia archaeology with him. I had Indian archaeology with him, and so that is like the basis of my Asian knowledge is coming from the art of that time period, of those time periods and stuff. And I still feel like that's a good amount of Asia. Did not barely probably touch any China or Japanese in any of those classes, and like Korea
Yeah.
or even like the Mongolia or even like any of the stands minus probably a little bit of Afghanistan and Pakistan and stuff. But
Yeah.
there's just a lot of gaps that I feel like I even it's probably the largest gap, at least even in general history, for myself, because I know a good amount about, or we'll say this, gap in ancient cultures, not
Yeah.
gap in history cultures in general, because I don't know anything about modern history, barely.
Yeah.
But it is a pretty big gap for me, and I don't like that because I love all
Yeah.
types of history and all types of archaeology.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's unfortunate, but it happens, and that's also why like I make it a point to look, my eldest son, he is the opposite of me. Now I love nature, but he's like
Mhm.
nature and like and things like that are his passion,
Yeah.
and also he loves math. He's great at math. I'm
Oh
just
yeah.
like, okay, well I'm the exact opposite. It's me. It's reading and history.
Yeah.
But I make it a point. It's like, okay, just because you don't like it, you're gonna have to learn accurate
Yeah.
history. And one of the things actually that surprised me when I went to my son's school one time is I was briefly talking with his teacher, and unprompted, she mentioned how she uh, was teaching about like the actual like history of Columbus, like how he was, the genocide and the
Hmm.
slavery, and I was just like, oh, I was like, okay, cool, because I thought to myself, okay, I'm just gonna let's just because I'm not one, I don't sugarcoat. I'm like, you can deal with it and you can get
Yep.
mad, and if I'm not invited back, then what the fuck ever. But
Yeah.
so had already planned to be like to crush people's dreams and like here's how archaeology works. Don't loot. Now, I wasn't going to
Yeah.
talk about the big archaeology laws because these were at the time these were like first graders. I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's irrelevant.
No,
It's not
absolutely.
it's yeah. But I was surprised about that, and so I was like, okay, that's good to hear. And then she later had me come back and talk about other European explorers, and and I added other like non-European explorers like
Hmm.
Zheng He, who was a Chinese explorer who sorry, not explorer. He's designated as an explorer, but he was an admiral, and essentially he was
Oh.
not exploring anything new. It was just there had been a shift in like a change in like the leadership
Uh-huh.
of China at the time, and the emperor was like, hey, these nations that were once paying us tribute, during the Civil War, of course, tribute got cut off. I want you to go back and tell them that we're back and they're going to pay tribute or else. And that was essentially
Oh my
and so
god.
he made multiple diplomatic expeditions, and it was like 14 see where it's like 14 I want to say I have to look at this. I think it was like 1414 through like
Okay. Yeah.
1438. So it was like a wide range of things, and this was in China at the time, and for most of it until the
So
1800s
funny.
was was the most advanced empire in the world. Like they had cannons and like they had ships that were like 4 times the size of Columbus's ship, and like at one point,
Yeah.
like on the way, he destroyed pirates and was like, "No, we're going to make these
Oh
lanes
my
safe so
god.
that we can get our tribute."
So
So I talked about that.
it's
I
always
talked
about
about
trivia. I love it.
and I talked about a Mongolian envoy who went from the Mongol Empire to Europe during the medieval period and things like
Hmm.
that. And then of course I talked about European explorers like De Soto and things like that.
Yeah.
I absolutely shit on them. I was like, oh, here's how they were stupid, and here's
Yeah.
what they said, and here's how they said that they almost died because the Native Americans were too difficult to fight, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
My
yeah,
my thing. This is another thing we were talking about before the stream started. Is the biblical archaeology, which is so difficult when talking about Egypt because
yeah.
I
Well,
truly well this is like the scary thing is
yeah,
that like I was raised Catholic and I went to Catholic schools,
yeah,
and Egypt was a huge thing that I loved, to be honest, because of biblical stories in Egypt and because Prince of Egypt
yeah,
was my favorite movie when I was growing up. And it still is, and I'm not gonna fight that at all. But when I literally did not discover this until I was actually in college and I was trying to pick what I should do for my senior thesis. Because I was able to do it as an independent study. I could literally pick anything. And I remember thinking, well, I wonder what the name of the pharaoh is in the Bible. And that's when I Googled it and I realized, spoiler alert for anyone who else hasn't heard about this because we've talked about this on the stream before, that there is no archaeological evidence that there was ever a large group of, one, enslaved people in Egypt, let alone an enslaved Jewish population. And this,
yeah,
like it didn't break my heart because I was not really practicing it Catholic anymore, but it honestly broke my heart for a friend of mine who was Jewish. And I literally was
yeah,
just like, oh my god, like it was the first like really big smack in the head that I was like, this is all based on lies and stories and all of these things. And when it comes to that, I for a while I was possibly going to intern with a woman who does a public archaeology and
yeah,
public history like nonprofit, but it is kind of mainly skewed towards Jewish like school groups
Yeah.
and children. And I told her quite honestly, I was like, I will do whatever you ask me to, but if people are going to really ask me about like, because this has happened going to grad school in the South, and having to give tours at the museum, and I get the lovely little third graders, and they look at me and they're like, "Is this from the time of Moses?" And I'm like, yeah, like I don't know what to say to them. And so I very honestly told her, I was like, I will sugarcoat it. I will definitely make it like digestible to the children, but I'm gonna have to tell the truth. I'm not gonna be able to like lie like and tell you stuff about the Bible, and that has become a huge difficulty for me.
Well, and you know, and I do know there are like some ways out of that, because you know, it's like Eric Klein, who's a very good archaeologist who specializes in that area, has pointed out. It's like, for example, you know, like Pi Ramesses and other Egyptian cities are mentioned in the Old Testament, and there is the Merneptah stele that is roughly 40 to 50 years after the reign of Ramesses the Great, that mentions Merneptah, his son, one of the only surviving son, because he had 50 fucking. Wait, he had more than that. I think
he had absolutely more than that. I think there's estimations of like 300, which is like genuinely insane to me. But I guess.
But you know, the point is, you know, he it's Ramesses' son, and it mentions just defeating Israel, and so you know, so there's like Eric Klein points out in his book 1178, the year civilization collapsed. He's like, so there is some very minor evidence that may have like suggested that some earlier events got added into the overall mythology. But you know, there's no evidence of the Exodus itself, and he pointed out, even if there was like post holes or anything like that we would look for, would be far destroyed by the desert sands and things like that.
Absolutely.
And after all, and maybe like to some degree the Hyksos, like expulsion of the Hyksos.
I think that is a very large, like, especially because at that time there hadn't really been any huge battles. They did military stuff, but like the Old Kingdom is very military minor than it becomes in later periods. So like, getting into that, it's like I can see, and this is the other thing that kind of broke my brain, is later in college I took a myth and literature class, and I thought we were going to be talking about like Zeus and all of those things, and this Jewish studies professor opens up and she goes, "We're going to be deconstructing the Old Testament," and that broke my little Catholic child brain, and I loved it, and it was great. And it when you suddenly flip the switch and you say, "Oh, the Bible is a literature piece, and it is a teaching, it is a large, persuasive essay," it like, oh, everything makes sense. Like, everything makes sense, especially then when you learn about like Mesopotamia, flood myths, and all of those things.
Exactly.
It definitely, it was a great class. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff. But again, like, I was way too old for that stuff to be opened. I wish I could have been learning new things rather than just like relearning stuff.
Well, and that happens, and I've run into that before, like recently, where I'm like in an Arc Methods class, because it's like I'm in the grad level, but there's also like undergrads there, and so he's talking about basic archaeological methods that I use every day in my work as an archaeologist, and I'm just like, don't say anything, Dane. Let these students learn. Don't bulldoze.
I know. Oh my gosh.
Because they're like, what is a feature? And I'm just like, don't say anything. And then nobody said anything, so I had to raise my hand. And I was like, it's a yada, you know. It's like,
I had to do this I had to do this in grad school too. We had to my main Egyptian course in grad school and my main Greek art course were both in undergraduate classes, and it was awful because I was just like, nobody's, and of course we're in a place that doesn't even have a really good art history undergraduate program, and I'm just like, why are we here? We should be in a separate class. Like,
exactly. You know, and that's, you know, and you know, and on the mythology thing, because like people try to prove mythology all the fucking time, and it's just like, and true. It's like it has you know, good backgrounds, but that's you know. And some of it is legitimately based off of like real things that they've been heavily mythologized. like over and over again, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
This is a random question. Do you know if there is a Chinese, Mongolian, or this area flood myth?
Uh, Chinese flood myth. So there is. It is the like there. So it's not quite the same as the Noah.
Yeah.
It is. How to put this? It is you. So there's an. According to the records of the Xia dynasty, there was a individual by the name of Hugh the Great who tamed the flooding waters. And Christians oftentimes try to like equate him to either Noah or to like one of Noah's sons.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the stories aren't about a worldwide flood. What the story talks about is that the rivers every year would flood to extreme levels. And so the people were like, what do we do? And so he's like, got it, let's build a canal system to deal with this. So it wasn't like, oh no, God is angry. It was like, oh, how do we deal with this legitimate issue? And he was like, I'm going to tame the floods with a canal system.
I love
that. And so it does exist, but it's like it's not what a lot of people tend to think it is.
I love that. That's the whole thing is people. I love talking about flood myths and stuff like that, and it's the one of the cultures that doesn't have a flood myth is Egypt, because why would they be scared of a flood when it happens every single year? So like it's so easy. Like obviously they're not gonna have a flood myth. Like it cracks me up, but I love that. That's funny. Not a flood myth, but like a explanation of technology.
I've had Christian I've had Christian friends like pull out Noah books talking about the various flood stories, and I'm just like, I saw that, and I'm just like, oh my god.
No, I know.
You know, it's like so. Yeah.
Alrighty.
So.
Does anybody have any last questions for Dane? This will go up on my YouTube, and I will tag Dane's YouTube as well. Actually, let me pull up your YouTube so I can put the link in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah. Archeo Viking.
It is on the bottom there, his username, but let me grab the link.
Oh, and I also run a archaeology themed D&D group that I do a podcast on. Called This Campaign in Ruins, where it's archaeologists in the realm of D&D trying to... Yeah.
Do you have that, do you have a link for that? Or what is it called? Archaeology?
It's called This Campaign in Ruins.
This Campaign in Ruins. Okay.
And it's on Spotify.
Let me see if I can find it. Come on. Stupid mouse.
You should see a little picture with a set of ruins in the top corner.
Yeah, let me get it. Google, come on.
Here, I can maybe.
Okay, wait. Let me just go to Spotify. How about that? Go to Spotify.
Yeah.
Alright. It looks like we have one question. In Chinese archaeology, is there a lot of friction between, quote, the stuff we found through evidence and, quote, the stuff people believed because of religious traditions?
I don't think that is quite the same there, to my knowledge. Because, like, for one thing, modern China is very heavily anti-religious, atheist, and that has a lot to do with when Mao and the communists took over. And yes, they are communists. I'm sorry, that hurts some people's feelings on the left, but they are communists. You can claim they're not real communists all you want, but that's just a no true Scotsman fallacy until other evidence is presented. But anyways, and when the communists took over, they campaigned heavily against religion because communism was against religion. So a lot of Chinese archaeologists aren't necessarily religious. That being said, the two largest religions in China are Buddhist and Taoist, and they don't necessarily have the same. Oh, it has to be the same as it was back then, as say Christians or Muslims, or Jews have. Monotheistic religions have.
Yeah. Friend at Arms mentions, like, do you get people trying to prove that Pangu hatched from a cosmic egg or whatever?
Not that I have seen. So, not that I have ever seen. So,
very interesting.
Doesn't mean it's not out there. I just haven't personally seen it in the research I've read. And again, I'm not a practicing, archaeologist in China currently. I'm, working to get my specialization in East Asia, but I have, and I've been to Mongolia, but I have not, I'm not a PhD working there yet. So that,
Absolutely.
you know,
Very, very interesting. So I dropped Dane's YouTube, and I dropped the link to the Spotify as well. So please check that out. Hopefully, I actually maybe might get this up tomorrow because I have the day off, but it will
yeah,
probably be next
and
week.
yeah, and that reminds me, I have several episodes of said D&D podcast that I need to actually upload that are pre-recorded, but like
Got it.
I've been so busy with work where it's just
Yeah, no,
yeah, it's cool, so.
everything's crazy, everything's wild, and I'm coming up to this time of year becomes very busy for MelissainDeNile because I have MelissainDeNile anniversary in September. I have Twitch anniversary in November. Then I have Christmas, and then I have my birthday in January. And so and also I'm trying to do stuff for International Archaeology Month in October. I'm trying to get together, which I need to start planning now because I'm trying to do a similar thing where I get multiple archaeologists and we all do discussion stuff. So that's it.
I'd be most certainly down for
Absolutely.
that, so.
Yes, I'm gonna start reaching out. I need to do it soon, but I probably should have done it sooner. But yes, I'm trying to see if I can do maybe 2 to 3 for the whole month so that I can get a couple different people and stuff in that. But yeah, trying to celebrate International Archaeology Month, which will be fun.
Yeah.
But yes, please check out Dane on all of his platforms. He also has a TikTok. The one on the bottom is blanking, but it's Dane Roberts 0 is what he is over on TikTok, and Archeo Viking over on YouTube. So thank you so much, Dane. I will say goodbye, and then we will do some chatting and go find somebody to go and raid. But thank you. Such an interesting topic. I now know so much more, which is always what we want these lectures to be.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. All right. Well, you have a good. Thank you for having me on, and you have a good evening yourself. So
thank you so much. Everyone say bye.
Bye.